Hi, today I want to talk about the book The Ride of a Lifetime. It's the memoir of Bob Iger, the man who ran Disney for many years. I picked 7 ideas from this book that I think are actually useful. Things you can apply to work and life, not just read as another success story. To be honest, at some point I cooled off a bit on classic business biographies. They often sound inspiring, but when you try to apply them in a different country, a different economy, a different reality, it's not always clear what exactly you're supposed to do with that inspiration. But this book is different. There are a lot of management ideas that are pretty universal. They don't really depend on time or circumstances. So the first idea is about worry. Iger writes that his parents were always worried about something and often expected that something bad might happen. He grew up the complete opposite. He almost never feared the future and wasn't afraid to try new things, even if he might fail. And the idea here is very simple, but very important. We can spend endless hours in our heads replaying possible failures, disasters, and problems. But the energy we spend worrying doesn't actually change anything. That same energy could be used for action. Worry almost never improves the outcome, but it almost always reduces the quality of your life. The second idea is about leaders and ego. Iger writes a lot about the people he worked with, and what struck me was that he constantly emphasized not intelligence, not genius, not education, but completely different qualities: honesty, directness, lack of ego, and the ability to calmly say, "I don't know." One of his bosses, for example, could say in the middle of a meeting that he didn't understand the topic and ask someone else to explain it or even run the discussion instead of him. And at the same time, he always publicly gave credit to his team and pushed people forward. And honestly, that's quite rare. Many leaders are afraid to look incompetent, so they pretend they understand everything. But strong leaders are usually the ones who are not afraid to be the least knowledgeable person in the room. If a person has healthy self-esteem, they don't need to prove their importance through their position. The third idea is about intuition and risk. At one point, Iger had to make decisions about TV shows, even though he didn't fully understand the industry yet. And someone told him a very simple phrase: "This isn't nuclear physics. Trust your gut." One of the decisions was to launch a very strange and unusual project at the time, the series Twin Peaks. It looked risky and confusing, but they decided to try anyway. And the idea here is important. If you only choose safe and obvious decisions, you will almost never create anything outstanding. Big successes are almost always connected with risk and with something that looks strange in the beginning. The fourth idea is about failure. What's interesting is that later many projects failed. Some of them failed very loudly. And Iger wrote a very strong line. He still considers those decisions correct, even though they failed. Because he always told his team, "I would rather take risks and make mistakes than build a business where there is no risk at all." And this is probably one of the most important management principles. If you want to create something new, you have to give yourself permission to make mistakes. Failure is not always the result of bad work. Very often, it's just an unavoidable part of any new project. You can't always hit the target if you are actually experimenting. The fifth idea is about optimism in leadership. There's a big part in the book about one Disney executive who was very pessimistic, and Iger says pessimism can sometimes be useful. It makes you more careful, more attentive to risks, better prepared. But the problem is that a leader does not have the right to infect everyone else with pessimism, because pessimism inside a team kills energy, initiative, and the willingness to take risks. When a leader always expects the worst, people start making decisions from a defensive position, not from a growth position. Leaders' optimism is not about wearing pink glasses and saying everything will be fine. It's about confidence that together you will handle problems and achieve the best possible result. People rarely follow pessimists. They follow people who project confidence and calm. The sixth idea is about bold proposals. There's a very telling story where Iger decided to propose to Steve Jobs that Pixar should be sold to Disney. He himself thought it sounded crazy and that he would probably be rejected or not taken seriously. But he made the proposal anyway, and the response was, "It's not the craziest idea." And the practical idea here is simple. People often reject big opportunities before they even take the first step. They decide in advance that nothing will work. But in reality, even if you get rejected, you usually lose almost nothing. At most, your ego gets hurt, but you stay in the same place where you started. But if it works, it can completely change your career or your business. And the seventh idea is about intellectual property and long-term thinking. The last big example is the acquisition of Marvel. When Disney bought Marvel for several $billion, many people in the industry thought it was a strange and overpriced deal. But inside the company, they understood that Marvel had thousands of characters, a huge fan base, and the ability to build an entire cinematic universe where all the movies are connected. Today, this looks obvious: shared universes, crossovers, Avengers, all of that. But back then, it looked like a very risky and strange strategy. And the main idea here is the ability to see the value of intellectual property and to think years ahead. Not just one product, but an entire system of products, stories, and brands. If you put everything together, the book is actually not really about Disney. It's about management, decisions, risk, and the character of a leader. And the main ideas that run through the whole book are these. Don't spend too much energy on worry. Don't let your ego grow too big and be able to say, "I don't know." Sometimes you have to trust your intuition. Without risk, there are no big wins. You have to learn to handle failures calmly. A leader should project confidence, not fear. Big opportunities often start with crazy ideas, and the most valuable things are brands, ideas, and intellectual property. Those are the main takeaways. Thank you for listening, and if you'd like to support the channel, the best way is simply to subscribe.